Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today on this webinar of a partnership between Manila House and Ateneo de Manila University Press. And we have with us today three writers, three well-known international writers who are quite, one in Paris, that's Bonnie, one in here in Makati, and one all the way from Batanes. Somehow it feels, Dorian, you're further away being in Batanes than in Paris. Um, so we're here to talk about writers and writing, especially during a pandemic. We'll get some insights into the way they work and how they've been dealing with the lockdown and where they're finding their inspiration. And then we'll leave the floor open later on for your questions and answers. On behalf of Manila House, I'm Bambina Olivares, the Director of Programming. And to start, let me introduce our panelists. I'm going to switch to gallery view. Okay, so I'll start with Dorian, right at the top. Dorian Merina is a poet and a journalist. He's the author of two chapbooks of poetry, Stone of the Fish and The Change Giver, and as well as a spoken word album called Heaven is a Second Language. He lives with his wife and daughter in Savidug, Sabtang, in Batanes, where he helps to document and preserve the Ivatan indigenous oral poetry, Laji. Next, we have Reine Melvin, also known as Bonnie. Reine Arcache Melvin was born and raised in Manila. She's a Filipino-American writer and the author of A Normal Life and Other Stories, and The Betrayed, which was published by the Ateneo Manila, the Manila University Press. The Betrayed won the National Book Award and the Palanca Grand Prize for the novel. A Normal Life won the National Book Award for fiction and was translated into French and published as Une Vie Normale by a Paris publishing house, Esprit de Péninsule. And finally, joining us today is Sarge Lacuesta, who has won many awards for his writing, among them 3 National Book Awards, the Madrigal Gonzalez First Book Award, the NBM Gonzalez Award, and numerous Palanca and Philippines Graphic Awards. He has written several books, including 5 short story collections, 2 nonfiction books, and a collection of graphic stories, and has participated in many writing residencies, fellowships, festivals, and conferences in the Philippines and abroad. So we've got a real panel of heavy hitters today, literary heavyweights. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we also have some very well-known Philippine writers joining us today as well among the attendees. I think you know who you are, but we're very honored to have all of you here. So as we were discussing earlier, in putting this webinar together, Karina Velasco and I, the publisher of the Ateneo de Manila University Press, we were discussing about how writers are affected by the lockdown or the pandemic in general. And you know how as writers, we always talk about not having enough time or not having the quiet, atmosphere in which to work. And now we suddenly have all of that. Plus we have the isolation that we always seem to say we crave. So how is that working out now for everyone? So I'd like this to evolve as like an organic conversation about writers working, how they work, what they look for, in terms of inspiration, how they keep to their craft, and how everything else around us is affecting us. And before we start, I just want to read from something actually that Sarge. This is Sarge's book, City Stories. In case you haven't gotten it yet, please do. It's a short story collection, right, about different places that you've been to, different cities. There was something that struck me in one of the stories. I think it was the second one, and it was kind of a little bit of an encapsulation of what writing is about. So it says here, writing is searching, someone once told me. You search for something and you don't know what it is until you found it. At the end of every sentence, every quantum of thought, the cursor blinks. The computer mocks my inaction by redirecting its energy to some other menial task, checking for system viruses, ferreting out lost clusters, and fluffing up feathery edges of clouds. So I think many writers probably feel the same way when they're in front of a blank screen and they begin working. So maybe I'd like, to start with by asking all of you, is this how you work? And has it been changed at all by the current circumstances? Anyone would like to start?
Bonnie.
Yes.
I was going to say Sarge.
Yeah, I know it's.
Yeah, there's something, because you started with that second story in Sarge's collection, and that's Life Before X, no? Is that the second story? I think it is.
Yeah.
And I love that part that you quoted, but there's other things in that story, in the other stories, which is writers search, but writers are also looking for mysteries. And there's a line there too where you say we live in a world of diminishing mystery, and I think that what really excites are mysteries. That's what excites us. That's what allows us to feel really, really intensely. And in any time of catastrophe, in any time of a feeding frenzy and the Great Barrier Reef, in any time when things really happen, danger, war, heartache, death, the veil that we kind of cover our ordinary lives with, because we can't live intensely all the time, we'd fall apart. But those moments when things happen and it feels like a veil is lifted, and then we feel very, very intensely, and we feel like there's clarity in the world, there's an intensity of the emotion. And I think that's what artists look for when they write, and that's what people look for in art also. When we hear a song, or we read poetry, or we read a book, or we see a film, and something seems to just open the heart. And I think at times like this, that was a gift of the pandemic, of confinement. I actually loved confinement. I loved lockdown. I went into stress when I had to come out of lockdown. So that's my take.
Because in France, it's relaxed now, right? You're in Paris, so it's been relaxed.
Yeah, I mean, it's relaxed. People are all kissing each other on the cheek again, which is really quite terrifying, And that's the other thing about this, about the pandemic, is that the people who can kill us are those who love us. It's those who are going to give us the kiss on the cheek, no? So we have to be very careful of those closest to us.
But do you have any boundaries now? Like when you go out and see other people, do you kind of tell?
I haven't really picked up on seeing people, It's I've tried as much as possible to stay very, very quiet. That won't last, but I don't even kiss my daughter, no. So, but she's big, she's not a baby, so it's doable.
But Sarge, you were saying you've been really careful in staying in the whole time.
Yeah, because I'm a high-risk individual. I'm diabetic, and by law, I'm not supposed to go out. I heard there's a law, so
Yeah.
I'm a law-abiding citizen sometimes. So for the past 6 months, I've been a law-abiding citizen. It's very boring to follow the law. But that said, I think it's a very, this pandemic has been very weird for me. You talked about me talking about a blank space, right? This is like a blank space for me. I have to be honest. I was just talking with some writer friends, some of whom might be in the audience right now, and they themselves have encountered this huge sort of writer's block. I hate calling it writer's block. I never thought I'd have it. I don't think I have it, but there's a really blank space, and I don't know if it's because I'm so used to sort of wrenching out writing time from a very busy schedule. I live in the business district and I do business, so I just sort of squeeze out enough time, and that makes it feel very precious and special. All of a sudden, like, you've got nothing but time. And this is a very privileged thing to say, right? Of course, some people don't have time. Some people are struggling right now. And that kind of imbalance, I think, has affected me a little bit. I don't know the right way to see this blackbird, It's very strange. It's very strange. And I'm very flattered that Bonnie mentions what I wrote, but it's very strange also because I can write so much about not being able to write. But that's as far as I can. That's as far as I can go, my friends. No, really, I mean it, and I tell my friends that it's been very difficult from this perspective. Also looking at the political side of things, it's been difficult looking at things.
But so have you been able to write anything at all, or it's just been
No,
blank?
I have a, like any other writer, and like any other writer, I have a project, you know.
Yeah.
Everybody, see, everybody's like, I have a project. You know, it has a deadline. The deadline is friendly, too friendly, I think. And I have some resolve, but the thing is, this pandemic is unprecedented. I just want to say that there are unprecedented feelings in us. You know, we sometimes don't know what to feel. You know, it's not just about being forced to be contemplative. It's about looking at the world through social media, for example, and looking at your own world inside. Sure, there's a lot to write. There's a huge substrate there, but I think then we fall into sort of being stunned. You know, of course, it's taken 5 months for me. You know, this constant stunning. You know, so I'm completely stunning now. Um, no, but the point is, yes, it's been different for me. It's been different for me. But though I have been writing, I am writing. I'm getting back to it, but I'm not the 2,000 words a day kind of writer. You know, I'm sadly not.
Were you ever?
No, no. I was like, I'm gonna do this overnight. You know, like 10,000 words in a night and never look at it again. You know, until a month later, and it all looks so bad. You know.
And Dorian, what about you in Batanes, where I understand there's 0 cases of COVID, but there must be something hanging over your heads because the threat is still there somehow.
Yeah, of course, of course. And you know, I love that we began this conversation talking about writing as searching, writing as an inquisition, either an investigation even into yourself internally, or moving outward into your community or the world. I'm a poet, I write poetry, but I'm also a journalist. And I think especially during times of crisis like this, journalism as a craft, as a style of writing and a discipline is especially important, you know, in order to inform, in order to educate, and especially in order to challenge and bring transparency to the decisions that are being made, to challenge those in authority, to try to understand better these very important decisions that are being made, and what the effect is on us as individuals and our families. So in that respect, I love the idea of writing as a activity of searching, of inquisition, and likewise in my poetry. I think now is a really important time as well to bring, whether it's poetry or fiction, to also bring other ways of imagining how this world can be and how we can organize our world and our communities. Because if we're learning anything at this time, we're learning that the way we have set up our world and our communities is leading to either pandemics like these, crises like these, whether it's climate change, stresses on nature, on our environment, on our food supply, and extreme inequality in our society. So I think poetry, fiction is a way to imagine a different world and imagine how other people are living, how other people are experiencing this. And I think both of those kinds of writing, although on the surface very different, have an important role to play during a time like this in crisis, especially when we're all isolated from each other.
But as a journalist, you say you also do work as a journalist. Are you working on any particular assignments with fixed deadlines? Because I think even as Sarge is saying, it's a different kind of writing when you know you have a deadline and you have to crank it out in one night or whatever, whichever way you work. So is that different compared to maybe writing poetry?
It is. I mean, I've never been successful at writing poetry under deadline. If anybody knows how to do that, let me know. I think it's a different part of your brain, a different part of your spirit. I could never do poetry under deadline, but I spent more than 12 years doing journalism under deadline. So it exercises different muscles, I think. But I do think when we're writing creatively, we need to balance the discipline, the external, forces with the spirit of the work. It has its own timetable sometimes, and we just have to listen to that.
Are you finding that too, Bonnie?
In what sense? In terms of deadlines, in terms of
Yeah, are you able to churn something out, or if it's
well,
creative?
for me, France is out of lockdown now. So there was the period of confinement, which, like I said, it for me it was a gift. It was really a gift. I was writing on my project or preparing my project every day. I had writing sessions with a novelist friend in South Korea and a filmmaker friend in Dublin, where essentially we would accompany each other in silence. We would just have little faces on the screen, and it wasn't every day, but just once in a while, so as not to feel so alone. And then I had some writer friends with whom once a week we just got together and we shared a little bit about what was going on. But essentially, every single day to be able to work on a project was wonderful, was really wonderful. My problem is that I'm a freelancer. I work as an editor and I work as a writer for magazines and publications. And all that work has dried up. It ended. And there was nothing I could do about it because it just wasn't there. Now that we're out of lockdown, there's the post-lockdown fears that are coming in. And that's in a way what concerns me, because there's an economic crisis that's coming out that's going to have political repercussions. Everybody's scrambling for work. The economic situation here is very bad. So those kinds of things worry me again, the practicalities of life, how to survive, how are we going to survive, how are we going to get through this? And that eats up a lot of the energy. And I'm taking any kind of work that comes to me, I'm grabbing it because I don't know how long it's going to last. And I no longer have the time or make the time, those hours every day that I had for writing, and I miss it desperately. So that's where I am now.
But also, what was your usual pre-pandemic? What was your usual routine?
I would always, every time I'm working on a project, I just force myself to sit down. I tell myself, it doesn't matter if nothing happens, I'm going to sit down. And somebody said, and I think it's been said a lot among writers, one doesn't write because one is inspired. Inspiration comes because one sits down to work. And I do believe that. I do believe in just showing up because I'm very scared of writing. I'm very, very scared. Like if I'm thinking about it, I panic. But if I sit down, something inevitably happens. I may throw it away. I may think it's terrible, but something inevitably happens. And I love the idea of one doesn't really know what's going to turn up on the page. And I think we've all had that. We think we know what we're sitting down to do, and then things start to happen. So I love that process. I haven't been doing it. The last few weeks, all I've been doing is what the French call travail alimentaire, which is literally food money.
Is that the same for you, Sarge? What was your routine before all this happened?
Well, yeah, I work for food money as well. But
So we all.
We all do.
We all do. Yeah.
Nowadays, it's more food than money, but I'm not complaining. I don't know, but seriously,
but you have a day job, right? You were saying you have a day
job. Yeah,
so you would look for time outside of the day job to work. So was there a particular routine you do every night? Would it be every night or?
Yes, I was telling a dear friend this, that, writing for me has always happened in a third space. It never happened at home. It never happened in my meetings or at work, but it happened in like another space that was usually sort of a restaurant or a cafe or something like that. Not writing, but germination. The sort of germination.
Yeah.
Well, Bonnie would know that. Living in France, it's like a big third space, right? Nobody stays in their homes there. They all eat out. So like, the homes are empty because they're all out. But seriously, and I've always sort of thrived on this sort of pressure. I'm like Daffy Duck, with a who lays who's asked to lay a golden egg, but he's a male duck, so he can never lay a golden egg until they shoot him in the face. And he finally lays a golden egg, and he says, never know what you can do until you got a gun against your head. So that's the kind of pressure I live with. But right now, it's the pressure. It's what's weird about writing in a sort of silence is that the only pressure you hear is the pressure of the idea. Especially if you have a project. I hope that we're not working on the same project, guys. Like my project is my project. But when you have a project, is that it's the pressure of the concept. It's the pressure of the idea, not necessarily the deadline. And I think Dorian was right. It will have its own time. It's gonna kill you when it wants to kill you. You know,
Mm.
it'll revive you, and it wants to revive you. It will make love to you, and it wants to make love to you.
Mm.
You know, you just have to wait.
Yeah.
And that's painful. It's painful. It's painful for writers who want to write. You know.
Yeah, and there's another aspect too of this, and I think it's listening. You know, often you think of writers as producers, as artists who create, right? And there's of course an element of creation, but the listening is really important too. Listening either to the process of your creation, your artistic process, to listen to those voices, or for me, my process is a little different. I am a writer, but my creative writing has always been very oral based. A lot of my work for the last 15 years or so here in Batanes has been documenting and preserving our indigenous oral poetry, which is Laji. It was never written down, so it's a living oral tradition. Unfortunately, many of the elders are passing now, so it's a critical time to preserve that. But in my own writing and poetry, it's always been informed by hip hop, by spoken word, oral poetry. My book Achichuk from Ateneo was composed mostly orally on my trips walking to and from the farm, right? So I would compose the verses over and over orally. I would listen to them. I would hear it, and then by the time I got home, it would be there. And then late at night, when the play village is quiet, my daughter's asleep, I can finally go down and put them to page, and then starts the process of revision and revision. But that oral part, where I can hear it and I'm listening to it, is a critical phase in my own process. And sometimes it takes a long time to refine that part.
But you also do written poetry, right? Which is also a kind of, you know, in a way, you have to say it out to get the rhythm.
Yeah, definitely correct. I mean, I think anybody writing for the page is different, but there's always an oral component, rhythm to it, breath. And you hope that your listener or your reader, even if they're reading in isolation, which can be an amazing experience and wonderful, they're still hearing it inside their own heart and their own mind, right? So you have to always take that into account. How does it sound to your audience?
Yeah. I agree with that. Even I'm not, I love poetry, but I'm terrible. The few times I've tried to write poetry, it's terrible. So I'm not a poet. But even writing fiction, I actually hear the sentences. And when I'm really working, it's almost like taking down dictation. You know, the rhythms come, and in the rhythms come the meaning sometimes of the work too. So yeah, so I really like that, what you said about hearing. It's hearing the language, but it's also hearing what needs to be said. What needs to be said now? What's the story? What's the story? Who's speaking? Who are the characters? What do they want? All that comes from another space. It doesn't come from here. It comes from being really quiet and beginning to hear them speak. And then that's when it's exciting, when it's almost like one's almost driven to say, okay, I hear them, I'm going to put this down. That's the best part.
Was that what happened, like when you were doing your novel, the last one, The Betrayed? You were
parts of it in the beginning, a lot of it was like that. And but then I edit so much because I write too much. But the actual sessions of writing are like that. And that's where I am now with a new project. It's like I know the form, I know the scenes, I know the little pearls in the necklace. What I don't really hear yet is the voice of the character. I kind of know who she is, but I don't hear her. And I know I have to be really quiet if I want to hear her. So.
And then it just comes like that when it
If it does,
just to
does.
get.
Yeah, if it does. Usually it does.
But Sarge, you're also an editor, right?
Yes.
So are you good at editing your own work? Because I mean, some writers need editors really, because they, like you were saying, Bonnie, but you're also an editor, but you know, you tend to kind of, you know, overwrite before you trim it down. But sometimes, you know, you don't know what to trim down. Or are you the same? Are you as critical with your own work?
Yeah,
you can do other people's work, right?
First of all, I wish I could overwrite. You know, I tend to
I hate you, Sarge.
No, really, what? Just 1,000 words? That's all I can do? Like, No, really, I mean it. But the truth is, I believe that everybody deserves an editor. You know, everybody deserves an editor. I've not just everybody deserves two editors, like an editor who reads the work and who tells you about the work, and a line editor or a copy editor
Yeah,
who
yeah.
looks at your work. And this is sort of, this might sound very basic or very elementary, you know, but it's kind of fundamental. This kind of and this is not just, you know, on the way to the page, on the way to the printed page. This is on the way to creating a sort of a quantum work of art, no, a piece of art, no. And as an editor myself, no, I would like to say that I'm not that kind of editor. I'm not the kind of editor who read a novel and tell you what's wrong with it. You know, I'll read the novel and I'll always tell you I like it, except that some parts I like more than others. So I'm too kind as an editor. That said, I do edit. I do act as editor at large for Esquire Philippines, and that's a lovely place to be in because it's lifestyle, but it's also very political at times, and it's also very existential at times. You can write, you know, and it gives me that kind of space, and also we've hosted, you know, thankfully and gratefully, we've hosted a lot of journalists who have graced our pages with a lot of real writing. When I say real writing, it's because I have a lot of respect for journalists. You are right. And I think sort of going back to what Bonnie was saying, because I feel that we're from a different sort of sensibility when it comes to writing. Although we both want to be, I would like to be in Paris as well. So, you know, we can't argue. No, but I sort of tend to look at writing as a sort of act of retrospect. You know, for example, I've been to one place and it takes me a long time to write about it. It'll take me years to write about it. So this in that sense that I kind of soak it up first. I kind of live it up first. You know, you go on a bender first, and then when you're 50 years old, you know, you look back and you say that was a good bender. I'm going to write about it. I think that's the way I do it. So it's kind of a laborious process. And it's interesting because among our group, like I think writers also tend to envy each other. No, like I envy your process where you can sit down and collect thoughts. In my case, I walk around or do my thing and then collect thoughts as I go around and do my thing. One day, you know, one fine day, I'll sit down and finally come to that thought, you know, that core thought that I was coming to.
And then it comes out perfect, Sarge, with no rewriting needed.
I don't know. No, there's a lot of work that goes into everything, you know.
Yeah.
So is it like a community of shared agony and envy at the same time? Kind of.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of shared agony. Yeah, there's a lot of shared agony. I think, I think a lot of writers commiserate. You know, they you know, if you don't, they're either commiserating or wishing each other the worst. So I'd rather commiserate.
Well, it's human nature as well. Like, why did you get published before me, or something like that? You know. But I think
No, yeah, absolutely. And my high school motto was, it's not enough that I succeed. Others must fail.
well, at least you're candid, so that's good.
My dad taught me that, and yeah. Anyway, so.
Dorian, what about you? I think you have to unmute, Dorian. Do you have like
Can you hear me now?
a community that you can turn to there, or do you find the need for a community of like-minded, you know, literary enthusiasts there in Batanes?
Yeah, there are. I mean, there are, especially among I spend a lot of my time with elders because of my Laji project, but among the youth here, I'm really impressed. There's a lot of wonderful young writers and artists here in Batanes that are, at this point, it's an interesting time because we've had almost maybe 6-7 years of this explosion of tourism. So there's been a kind of a new reevaluation of our own culture and the value that it has, and how do we preserve it and protect it and share it at the same time with other Filipinos or with people abroad and so forth. So the young people have really picked up on that, and whether it's visual artists or literary, there's a really a growing scene of young people who are doing either spoken word or are using music, writing original songs, and I'm really inspired by them here. In fact, we were supposed to have a few events to do some laji and some new work from younger artists right as the pandemic was unfolding here. Those events unfortunately were canceled, but Yeah, I do. I love the energy and the work that's going on here as well. And since the pandemic began here, we've also launched a community-driven local podcast called Historia No Ivatan, where we're capturing our own stories and telling our own stories and finding out how this crisis is affecting each other. And it's a way that we can communicate to each other across islands, and it's a way we can foster and use our own language because we feature Ivatan language in it. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's been a great place to connect as well.
Your podcast is in Ivatan or in English, or I mean,
It's a mix. It's some of the interviews are in Ivatan, some in Tagalog, and some of it's in English. So it's kind of like me, like us, like who we are. And my wife joins also. So we're very, we have a global background, and I have mixed ancestry. So it kind of is a reflection of us. But we talk to our neighbors and our other community members here, and it's in a mix of all different languages. Yeah.
yeah, because you spent some time. You grew up in the States, right? And then you have Irish German ancestry, and all. It's really interesting. And then you're Spanish, kind of like
Yeah.
mind blowing. Yeah.
Right. So people always ask. So yeah. So I grew up mostly in California. My father is Ivatan. I live in the village now called Sabidug. It's the village that my grandmother was born in and raised in. A lot of my family still lives here. My grandfather is from another part of Batanes called Basco or Basay. My mother German Irish from New York. So I kind of like to embrace all of that as I try to explore all of that. And I'm raising my daughter here now, and she's born here and raised here. But I also still want her to know about her country, about the rest of the Philippines, about the U.S. as well, and her own ancestry.
But when you have journalistic assignments, do you like travel to Manila to do, as part of the story? If let's say they're like you wrote something for Caravan, right? For an Indian publication about Jose Rizal, actually. I thought it was really interesting. So you had to come to Manila and talk to people, research that.
Yeah, definitely. Before the pandemic, yeah, I always passed through Manila, and I often did journalism work based in Manila and outside Manila throughout the Philippines on forestry, on climate change, on religion, on politics. So yes, and it brought me throughout the Philippines, and also I've reported throughout Southeast Asia as well. So in Thailand or Indonesia, other places as well. I mean, all that has stopped for now, and I can't report on much because I'm living here. So we are confined to where we are here, and we're trying to make the most of it. And we're just really digging into our community and trying to support each other so far here while this, is unfolding.
But I just want to read another thing from that same story about X from Sarge, because that was also another way that writers tend to work. Let me try to find it. Something like, I thought it was really funny. It actually made me laugh out loud. It says, I feel cooped up, I feel confined. I confess to her, writing night in, night out in Gabby's room. The world is moving at an inexorable pace, I say, remembering the muted TV image and the vast unexplored ocean in the corner of the computer screen. I feel irrelevant. The world could be ending. Us writers are still too busy trying to write about it. I think it was like a wonderful paragraph.
Yeah.
Sure, I wrote that. I think you wrote that.
When did you write this, Sarge?
I wrote that more than 20 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, really? Well, it's
I was 2 years old. I was 2 years old.
Prodigy. But isn't it so true as well? That's also part of, I mean, like you were saying, Dorian, we feel that, as writers, we speak a certain kind of, or we hold the light to a certain kind of truth. But the truth as well about writers is that we also tend to procrastinate, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
How does that,
We're procrastinating answering your question right now.
Well, that's why I found the practice of journalism actually very helpful in my creative writing, because in journalism, you have a hard and fast deadline that if you miss, there are severe consequences. Likewise, if you get something wrong, there are severe consequences. So there's a lot of accountability. And I carry that over into my creative writing as well. It is a craft, the inspiration is involved. And we need to find our own individual way to foster that and to open up to it and to come to terms with it and build a relationship with it. But craft is very important, right? And part of that, as Bonnie said, or a big part of that, is showing up. And there's so many reasons in our modern world to not do what is calling you, right? There's errands, there's this, there's that, there's distractions, there's responsibilities, and especially now, from what I hear, I think our experience is a little different here in Batanes because we go out, and I'm going out often. But I think if you're confined, that with the mediation of technology, those distractions persist. So how do we find a way to clear out the noise, right, and access that place of inspiration or access that place of creativity is still a challenge, even though we're living through this unprecedented time now.
So, like Bonnie, you were saying, you just show up. That's
yeah. I mean, I show up. It doesn't mean that I have a productive session, but I really come to believe that I just sit down and I work, and it usually takes about 10 minutes to get into it. There's a lot of fear. I'll go back to that. There's a lot of self-criticism. It's like, oh, you think you're a writer? Oh, you think this is interesting? There are those voices. I think the outer world and the things to do in the outer world can interrupt the writing. I think I interrupt my writing a great deal. I think the self interrupts a great deal. It's also from the inside out. It's like, I should be doing this, I should be doing that, et cetera, et cetera. And then the commentary that's going on with the writing. I think also it's again linked to, I guess, like it's the topic of my book and the topic of everything else. It's like, where's the passion? And I really do, I mean, that's what I was exploring in the book. It was the passion between men and women, between sisters, but it's also in my own life. Yeah, my fear is that driving passion to say something, to having something that I need to say, that needs to get into the page. I'm scared that I won't find that again, or that I'll find it for a moment and then it will go, because there's a voice now that criticizes a lot, saying, why is this interesting? Why should someone read you? Why are you going to spend years again on something that may, it's quieting those voices, which, to be honest, is really, really loud when I'm procrastinating. But when I actually sit down and face the page and start doing my stuff, it's gone in 2 minutes because I'm just doing. And I tell myself, look, if this is bad, I'll throw it away right now. And then it just comes because other voices take over, and I start to hear, as Dorian said, I start to hear other beings come alive. And that's really, for me, that's really exciting. But it never stops the fear for the next session.
It's quite common, right? That I guess it's called imposter syndrome, right? In a sense, because I mean, you guys are multi-awarded. You between Sarge, you and Dorian, I mean, and Bonnie, you've got a whole, slew of awards that have validated you as writers, really writers and poets, and so you still have that niggling doubt, in your head.
That's niggling, Bambina. It's like huge. I think we're all writers. We're all writers. We're all writers. Maybe a work we did was recognized, but it's always a new work. Yeah. It's a new page. You start.
You're only as good as your last book or your last.
When you're starting again, you're really starting again. Whatever you did before, if you're repeating it, for you. I mean, it's always facing it again and trying to stay. I guess for me, it's also trying to really stay very honest, very true to what I'm trying to see, to what I'm seeing in the world. And it's kind of easy to filter things through what I've already thought, through what I've already written, through what I've read elsewhere. All of that influences, of course, but to really try to see clearly, to hear clearly, to see clearly, and to feel those things in the human heart, you know, that somehow need to be said. And that's exciting when I do reach that point, and not to be fake.
I think that's really important too, that you believe in something that needs to be said, because okay, we won awards, we published our writing or whatever, but there's a lot of failure, there's a lot of rejection as a writer. You know, I still have some of my pitches are rejected, manuscripts are rejected, criticism comes back from writing. It's hard to hear sometimes, but hopefully it's constructive, hopefully it's helpful. Not always, it isn't always that way, but that's the process, that's the creative process, right? And in journalism, or I would once again refer to how I started in my creative writing, hip hop and spoken word. It's highly collaborative, right? And so you're constantly like critiquing each other and getting feedback back, and that can be very helpful and productive. But at the end of the day, you have to believe in what you're writing. You know, nobody else can tell your story or tell the stories you want to tell. Nobody else can do that. Only you can. And people can say, oh, I didn't like that much, or it's not going to make my magazine or my whatever. But at the end of the day, you know, it's your story. So if you believe in it, keep on it, you know, keep doing it, keep working on it. It'll find an audience.
Same for you, Sarge.
Well, I was struck by what Bonnie said, and also what Dorian said, because you sort of both kind of talk about passion in a very different way. I'm not going to talk about awards, because for me, like, you know, the biggest recipe for failure is that kind of success, you know, that kind of success. So I don't think writers think about that when they're writing, you know, real writers. I'm going to say real writers. It sounds a bit arrogant, but real writers should not think about that in the first place. But we should think about passion, because that's where I look to my fellow writers, Bonnie and Dorian, because you're able to write Bonnie, I read your novel, of course, twice, in fact.
Poor
And
Sarge.
it's a whole book. You know, Dorian, I have yet to read your book, but I would love to read it because I'm a big fan of hip hop myself, really huge fan. And I love. I've come from a minority myself. My great grandmother is a Mansaka, no? So we're a minority ourselves. So in other words, that formed book, that sort of sustained work, that's a book, right? And that's something that I would like to have. You know, I want to say this, no? And I think my question, I want to just bump the question a bit to you guys, because this kind of passion, this kind of, you said it right, like you have to have that passion, you have to find that moment of passion, right? Or that night of passion. How do you do that? You put together a whole book, and it's not just one night, right? Or even a book of poetry, Dorian, that's a thematic, organic piece of unity. You know, and that's something, I guess I came here to learn as well, you know, and that's something I can do during the pandemic. Doesn't cost a lot, you know.
So this is like a master class, a free master class.
Yeah, I'd really love to know, because Bonnie wrote a whole huge book, and I loved
She
it.
wrote an amazing book. It really was. It really
And Dorian,
was,
because what you said about your book being influenced by so many things, and it's still being sort of true to its original sort of, you know, theme, one book. That's something I'm interested in. That's what a novel is, right? That's what the novel is, and that's what a book of poetry is.
Actually, like the three of you, I've read your books, right? And I have to say that there's a similarity in the way you all write. There's like a kind of economy of words, but with that, you know, with wallop, you know, it packs a whole bunch of emotions. And like in Bonnie's work, like all these things that if you're trying to write about Philippine society, there are all these things you have to put in, like class signifiers and all that. And you manage to put it with, you know, really a lot of restraint, I think, considering how surreal our country is. And, you know, if you're trying to explain it all in a book, sometimes it tends to get you know, it's a bit overwrought or something, but you manage to do it with a lot of economy, but a lot of emotion, you know, a lot of passion. And the same with your short stories as well, Sarge and Dorian. I mean, obviously with poetry, you're trying to distill a lot into, as you know, very few words, but you're trying to say so much, right? And those few words embody so much. So it's like, it's an amazing skill all of you have. I mean, it's incredible talent. So how, like I guess it also goes to self-editing as well, and I don't know, how does the process work for that, for you guys?
Well, I mean, for me, I think a discussion, and this is just my own experience, but discussion of creativity and creative work and writing should include finances. I mean, I think that
Thank you.
if, for me, the, I mean, I do make part of my living as a writer and an editor. That's in journalism mostly. And as an editor on audio programs and podcasts, etc. I enjoy the work. I love it. And there's a certain degree of passion there, but poetry is a different thing. And for me, in order to support that kind of fiction or poetry writing, you need to figure, and I'm kind of speaking to my younger self here. I mean, you need to figure out the finance part of it. Like, are you trying to write so that you can support yourself and your family in it? It might be a certain kind of thing, it might be a certain thing. You may need to be willing to make certain compromises in terms of time, length, format, etc. Are you trying to write to just really unleash that passion, to pursue it, to really, and for me, what I've had to do is balance that, right? Find a way to make my bills, feed my family, do that. I don't come from a wealthy family, so you know there's a reality there, right? But find a way to carve out that that time, that space, that psychic energy, that support, that community to pursue creativity and writing. And it's taken me 20 plus years to figure that formula out. But I think I saw a lot of my peers and myself, I know, went through a lot of challenges because we had to figure that out, because we are living in the economy and the realities of this world we are, where art, writing, creative writing, fiction, poetry, I mean, you're gonna become a millionaire being a poet. You have to figure that stuff out. Otherwise, you're gonna just be too stressed out to do the creative work that you need to do, you know? And so that's one of my biggest pieces of advice to my younger peers, is that find a way to support your creative work and find a way that you're comfortable doing it in a way that you maintain your integrity and your passion in what you want to do and the stories you want to tell.
Wow. Yeah.
It's not easy sometimes.
Yeah. And like Sarge, you're saying you have a day job, right? So, you know,
Yeah.
like as Dorian was saying, you're balancing out the financial.
I'm an entrepreneur, so I run businesses, and you know, as you know, during this time, all businesses are in peril, you know, except the government business. But I just want to say that it gives me a sort of perspective. It gives me a sort of balance and a lot of respect for the other side of life. There are a lot of writers who sort of think that just because you're a writer, you know, you're hot, you know, you're like, you walk on air, you walk on the clouds. And I think, Dorian, you put it so well, you know, I mean, I was reminded of like Jay-Z, you know, hustling for 5 years to make a hit, you know, to sell albums from the back of a pickup, from the back of a van, you know, just to do that on the side, right? That's the way I think of myself. And that's the way, ironically, the writing is made pure. Because in a way, I don't need to write for a living because I do something else for a living. That's been a formula for me. You know, I really literally don't need to write. I am a copywriter, you know, I own an ad agency. You can hit me on Facebook. Anyway, no, I am a copywriter. I own an ad agency. And of course I write for a living. That's my living. But I know I'm not writing for a living anymore. There's a real divide and there's hardly any bleed. There's no bleed between them. So in that sense, you know, my anger is contained in this sort of space. My anger and my ugly feelings and my dirty self and my real self is there. So in this case, this kind of balance, you know, preserves the entire engine. It's an engine for me. It's an engine. That's the only way I've found that I can continue writing and continue writing sort of in this third space. All these other spaces are just there to support this third space.
But do you switch off entirely when you're working your day job? Like, or
No.
I guess filter in, right?
Well, if I have clients on the in the audience, I'm gonna say no, it never filters in.
Oops. Sorry.
And I really am taking notes during the meeting.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, this is part of the I know a lot of writers who are like Dorian. You know, you're a journalist too, right? You get a lot of material from there. You
Of
know,
course.
this is what living is about. You know, you get a lot of material from there, and as you grow older, you realize that writing fiction, for example, for me, is a matter of living. It's a matter of experience.
Yeah.
Then you go back and you say, I did this. This happened to me. Everybody from, Carlos Bulosan, who worked as a laborer, you
Yeah.
know, to,
Yeah.
to all the writers now who work in ad agencies, who work in television networks, who work as script writers. They know the kind of drama that gives them and the kind of substrate it creates. That's essential too. You can't like pull yourself up and say, "Oh, I'm just gonna,"
Create.
But you could, you could, but you'd have to be really good, And I would have to go there and kill you.
Okay, you mentioned Jay-Z. Can I ask does music play a part in is there music going on while you're writing, or you want complete silence?
Oh, we gotta talk about music. We gotta talk about musical influences. Yeah.
Yeah, do they influence your work? Yes. Sarge, go on. You seem...
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry.
So banana.
I wasn't
You're so banana.
answering myself. Like I'm gonna ask myself a question. But no, since Jay-Z is a trigger because I always listen to music when I'm writing, when I'm thinking about writing. I'm always so obsessed about one particular piece of music or one particular kind of music. And then I shut off the music when I'm writing. But the road to it is like just loud, That's just me. So
Yeah.
I'd like to hear about the others,
Yeah, Bonnie, do you have music in the background?
Yeah,
Or
I kind of need music and noise. I tried once to like work in libraries and I went insane because it was so quiet. I like working in cafes because there's kind of a buzz, and once in a while I eavesdrop on people's stories. And at home, I tend to have either really nice classical music or really soppy, sentimental playlists. And they play again and again and again and again. And my family goes insane because I play the same songs for 6 hours. But it's like getting into a trance in a way, it just sets the mood. And either that or noise. I'm good at noisy places because then I shut everything out. It helps me to concentrate, but not.
It's like being alone in a crowd. It's like being alone in a crowd.
Alone in the crowd, yeah.
Each night, it's fun. Yeah.
But Dorian, you have hip hop and rap as an inspiration, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because music, sound, rhythm is very important to me. And I did a whole spoken word album collaborating with a very talented DJ in Los Angeles called DJ High End, Rudy Mangual. And he did the tracks and I did poetry behind it. And every track has music and poetry with it. And it was a collaboration in that way. However, I do find with my poetry, with most of my poetry, and that goes for this book, Achichok, I really do need quiet. I need quiet, not necessarily silence, but it needs to be a sustained focus. There's a thread. There's a thread where a poem unfolds for me, and if something else comes in, it can be nature. That doesn't interrupt. But if another human comes in and demands my attention to respond or to think, it's gone. It evaporates. It vanishes. And I find I really need to respect when the inspiration comes. I need to heed it. I need to respect it, and I need to honor it, and I need to probably. It usually happens when I'm on a walk, but if I'm not, I need to go on a walk, and then I work it through. And I do need, I need that focus. I need uninterrupted focus, and otherwise it goes away. So I have trouble sustaining that kind of attention if I'm in a crowded place or if I'm among other people.
Okay, well, we have a bunch of questions, but before we go to that, I just want to ask you also about what you read, because writers are also supposed to be readers, right? And supposedly quite voracious readers and all that, because you're also trying to absorb what's going on, what other people are writing about and all that. So what have you been reading during this time, apart from your own work? Sarge, you have a huge smile. Okay, so you go.
I'm thinking, what am I reading? What am I reading? Like, what have I been reading? transcript of the State of the Nation, transcript of the update on COVID. No, I tend to read, when I'm writing, I tend to read a lot of nonfiction. Because if I read fiction, I just get angry, with the writer. Like, no, actually, the last, I have been reading Ian McEwan, Machines Like Me. And
which one? Which book of
Machines
his?
Like Me. Machines Like Me.
Okay. I read that one during lockdown. Yeah.
It just came out last year. So, anachronistic, very, very interesting. But really part of the quiet is part of following the thread, as Dorian said. And I think that's such a great metaphor, because you really do follow a thread. And it's like as thin as a thread. It's really a razor thin line that you have to follow. And that's sort of distracted all the time by something that you read that you shouldn't have read, or something that you don't want to listen to. But then you come upon something that you want to hear all the time, or you want to see all the time, and you're there, right? So I'm very careful about what I read in that sense. I can't read social media because it's all noise anyway, right? It doesn't really sort of contribute to anything truthful nowadays, a truthful idea of the world or the state of the world. But if writing is about the truthful state of the world or the truthful state of man, then for me, it really is about reading something that bounces off, certain ideas that I have. And this is almost totally nonfiction. Because you want to sort of validate what you have against what's real out there.
Yeah, that's true. Bonnie, you want to share?
I'm like Sarge in that way. Like when I'm really into fiction, it's hard to read fiction because either I get discouraged or I compare or I unconsciously start to reproduce things. But I was reading Roberto Bolaño because I like very much the simplicity of his writing, the political thing, but he gets people's passions also very well, and that kind of interacting of what's going on in the personal, the artistic and the political spheres together. I read, for example, A Distant Star, which is a small, really amazing book. I also, I read poetry because poetry feeds my soul. And, those dark nights of the soul, I turn to poetry, really poetry. And for the same reason, I read spiritual things like Buddhist things. And because for me, writing and trying to find what I should write about and what to bring into the world now, it's linked to a kind of spiritual, that's a big word, it sounds pretentious, but it's linked to a kind of spiritual search as well. Like what matters now, what holds, what's the center. When I was younger, I thought I was very interesting and that I could do versions of my life and it would be an interesting story. I'm very impatient with myself now, so I'm looking at the stories there in the world and the meanings that might matter, that might bring consolation to the human heart, so I don't think really in that terms, but that's the spirituality and the writing practice. For me, they're linked. Very often unsuccessfully, but there is a link that's important at this point in my life.
You, Dorian? You can share what you've been reading.
Yeah. I'll say, I find I'm a very, very slow reader when it comes to fiction. I mean, that's not intentional, I guess, but I don't know, maybe finding the time or what. So my wife will rush through 5 books or 6 books, and I'm still halfway through one, but for the last 2 years I've been really reading the novels of Toni Morrison, actually. Especially there's one called A Mercy, which is set in Virginia, America, before it's the 17th century, so it's before America became America. And the way she just explores characters, and well, first of all, she's just a magnificent writer, amazing. But the way she explores characters, her characters are always complex and surprising, and they're caught in this caste system of racial or gender oppression, state violence, and yet they are not simple victims. They find a way to be human. They find a way to live. And it happens in a very intimate, scale often. But I have just found, especially now, in what the U.S. is going through in terms of its reckoning with racial injustice, I found her stories just incredibly relevant, even if they're having to do with the 1600s, 1700s, or the book I just finished is called Paradise, which is about mid 20th century and early 1900s. Just when we look back in history, and this is the same in the Philippines as well, when we explore our own history, it is incredibly powerful, I think, to our present moment. And I find over and over it's rich ground when we look back at the choices that people made and the circumstances people dealt with in our past.
Well, that's kind of what you wrote about in the Betrayed, right, Bonnie? Decisions people make and how history kind of
Exactly.
replays itself, especially within our setting.
Again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
And another, I'm just, something that you said, Dorian, made me think of this, like what one searches for. And I think something that's very important in what I look for when I read, but also what I try to bring out in the writing is another aspect, like in the world today, although it's women's desires, what it is to be a woman, a woman. And this is something I'm a mother of daughters. It's a family of women. And I think we're strong women. At the same time, perhaps I see it more clearly with my daughters. We have our bodies, but our bodies belong to the world. We're always looking at ourselves being looked at. Even women's desires, women's sexuality, what we want, it's so, we suffer from being looked at, being sexualized. At the same time, we're brought up to be looked at, to make ourselves objects of sexuality too. That's also a question of power, to be able to be sexualized. It's very, very confusing in a way, because and I like to explore that in my characters, what it is to be a woman, what it is to want. It's very hard to know, I think, for a woman, what do I really want? What is my real desire? Or to play the woman, the sexualized being, the sexualized object. And in some ways, in some ways, my characters are complicit in that as well. And it's something I like to explore. I'm saying it really badly, but it's that look of women always being looked at, like the body never really belonging to her, and to be so vulnerable in the world as a woman in a woman's body.
But you have that one character, right? The one sister who defined herself in terms of being wanted by other men.
Exactly. And who gives her sister to her husband.
Yeah.
It kind of, because everything is a sexual play, but then sexual plays can only last so long in a woman's life. The sexuality of a woman is also defined by the, I won't say the sexuality of a woman, the desirability of a woman is also defined by society. But a woman
supposedly has a shelf life, right?
Yeah, so-called, whereas the sexuality does not have a shelf life. Yeah. And then one comes that, a man can continue, so those are things that women, that a woman is facing, and then trying to make her own way in the world, and always being looked at and judged at the same time as this object of desire, and trying to make herself an object of desire while also being a subject of it. So those are things I really like to explore in the writing, just because I think it needs to be said, and it's very, very complicated.
Yeah, that's great.
And like in the Me Too movement, the women who actually went on to have an affair with the men who raped them, or a love affair. It's very, very complicated, all this, and I like to go into that and explore it. Sarge, you have a very skeptical expression on your face, and I would love to know what you're thinking.
No, it really is an expression of a person who has no right to say, because I think, yes, it is incredibly complex, and it is incredibly important to say those things, because only a woman and only a writer can say those things, you know. The full
I
can
don't
embrace
agree
the
that
full.
only a woman can say those things. I don't believe that we can only write because a woman can only write about women or a man about. I
Or
don't
about,
agree.
no, I'm talking about being a woman. I'm talking about being a woman.
Yeah,
No,
about being a woman.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
talking about being a woman. Of course, you know, I have a lot of women characters in my books,
Oh, thank God.
and they're more interesting always than the men. You know, I'm not interested in men, but the only man I'm interested in is myself a lot. But no, seriously, but seriously,
Your men all have mistresses, Sarge.
What they
sorry.
do.
Your men all have mistresses. That was so funny. When I was reading the stories, it's like, this one has a mistress as well. This one also.
I think my men all know how to love. You know.
Okay.
You know, and it doesn't matter who they love or what they love or how they love. You know, it's and this is what I was talking about. You know, when we talk about those, I think I just want to pay a lot of respect to what Bonnie said, because it's a great thing for a writer to know what they're writing about. It's a great thing, because a lot of writers don't.
Mm.
You either know what you're writing about, and or you have the talent to write it. You know, I don't know. I never know where I am, so I'm always doubting myself, and that's a great way to start as well, because you just keep at it. You know, but I do like to write about those things that you can't say. You know, the ugly truths. You know, the dirty feelings, the sad things. You know, it's there's so much. You know, and there's so much connected to being Filipino.
Mm.
You know, there's so much about being Filipino that's sad and ugly and dirty and can't be said sometimes and is sad to say. You know, somebody wrote an article about not wanting to be Filipino anymore. And, you know, he has a point, you know, but I'm Filipino, you know, and I want to write about things like that. So I think that's, that, you know, I think the act of writing is that, you know, sorry. I mean, it is sort of finding the complexity that you want to capture.
Well, and being brave enough to write about it as well.
I think being a writer by itself is like an act of it's a big act of bravery to say, you know, I'm going to write in a world that doesn't read anymore.
No, but there's that also.
Yeah, I mean that's a big, you know, you can become a firefighter. You know, the world is heating up. A lot of people need you, but a writer, like, nobody needs you anymore, really.
Okay, shall we
Thank you for making me feel needed. Like, thank you today.
Let's go through the questions, because there are quite a few questions. Bonnie, this is for you. Is it easier for you to write in France than it is in the Philippines? Is successful writing also a function of being able to see or feel the story from a distance? This is from Gianna Montinola. Thanks, Gianna, for the question.
So much of my writing is about the Philippines that I told myself that my next book, I really, really, really don't want to write about the Philippines. And of course, the Philippines is creeping, because that's my home. That's where I grew up. Would I write the same in the Philippines? I don't know, because being who I am with mixed ancestry, and always every country I live in, I have an accent that is not quite the right accent, or the face that doesn't quite go with the country. So I'm always a foreigner wherever I go. So maybe having distance and living in Paris helps me to write, because there's less distractions, there's a lot less socializing in a way. But I think I also lose the dailiness of the sensations of things that I write about in the Philippines, and that's why I go back to the Philippines about twice a year. I really need that. And this year has been hard because I haven't been able to go back. So I always have one foot there. Even during lockdown, I was following the news in the Philippines. It was really what was going on in here was like 10 minutes. And then the rest of the time I was following what was going on. So I don't think it's a question of place. I think, again, it's a question of where the heart is, and that you can't really control. You know, it's just some things are just more intense and mean more to me. I never really connected to the passions in France, all the demonstrations in the streets, and what people are fighting for, compared to what people are fighting for or not able to fight for in the Philippines. There seemed to be like quite a disparity in terms of to me, importance. So Gianna, I don't know if that answered your question, huh? But
I think this one would be for Sarge. Most literary scholars believe writing novels occupies a different dimension. They say that short stories are pieces of the world, while novels deal with worlds. What is the right attitude to deal with short stories, poems, and novels in general for those who wish to write these in light of these opinions? Well, this is for all of you, I guess. Yeah.
no, it's for Sarge.
Well, I saw short stories first, so I thought Sarge.
I like to think of of course, the novel is a European invention, but I like to think of the novel now, as a lot of, this is such a delicate answer, but the novel can sometimes be a marketing tool. That's how the West sees it first. A lot of publishers will publish a novel first rather than a collection of short stories. But for example, Bonnie and I published our first books as books of short stories. I was a fan of Normal Life. And I have a great respect for the short story. I have a great respect for it because it is a world to me. It is a world to me. I don't make a distinction between a short story and a novel. A novel is a long story. Japanese, for example, don't make a distinction between a story and a novel. If you look at their stories, if you look at their longest novel, it really is a compendium of shorter stories. That said, poetry is a totally different game for me. It's a totally different game. I did write poetry. I'm never gonna say I was a poet. I did write poetry. I feel embarrassed I think it's there for you to either be proud of or to be embarrassed about. I'm embarrassed about the poetry I wrote, but I'm saying it's a very different linguistic. It's a very different linguistic part of the mind. Different part of the mind. That poetry to me is so much closer to magic. So much closer. I have such a lot of respect for it. While stories and the novel are about the world for me. They're about the world. And I'll stop at that distinction. I won't distinguish between what makes a short story or what makes a novel. If you write a short story long enough, it becomes a novel. And I'm sure as proof, a lot of novels did begin as short stories. In fact, a lot of films work better as versions of short stories rather than novels.
That's true. Like Brokeback Mountain.
Brokeback Mountain, exactly.
Yeah, Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah, and it's written by not a novelist, but a person who almost defines herself, whose career is defined by short stories, not her novels.
And there's
Dorian,
Alice.
Sorry? No, go ahead, Bonnie. What were you
I was
saying?
going to say there's Alice Munro, who does only short stories.
Only short stories, and
William
William
have the richness of a novel. It's
Yeah.
And there are novels that are as thin as I mean, yeah.
And
That
William,
said,
I agree. A long short story can become a novel.
but I do want to say, sorry, because I have great respect for the novel and for novelists. In fact, I'm in the middle of writing one now, that it is also a linguistic act. It's a linguistic act, especially for the Filipino writer. And I'm not just talking about, I would like to think that we're all sort of we're all Filipino here, in our sentiment and even the worlds that we wrote, worlds that we've written, It's very, we're Filipino writers in English, in fact. No? In fact, we have to create a world out of that language, out of the Philippine English language. It's an entire world. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's a serious pursuit. It's a serious act of scholarship, I should say, an act of research, I should say, and a serious act of commitment to create a world out of that language. The Filipino novel has to be a linguistic novel, in my opinion. And reading I've read all the Filipino writers in English, and it's the language that tells another kind of story.
But Dorian, because you also write in Ivatan, right? And what comes first?
I do.
The English or the Ivatan?
Well, it depends on the format. If I'm trying to write in the tradition or compose, I would say in the tradition of inspired by Laji, I try to work with Ivatan. although that's still a process for me because it's not my first language. So I'm relearning our language here, right? But for me, I mean, there's probably a lot that can be said on one level in terms of craft, where these genres are different and demand different kind of skills and different attention, different practice. But for me, what's most important really is the story, you know, and that can come out in a poetic form, that can come out in a song, that can come out in a novel or a short story. But for me, I need, I'm speaking as an audience here, as a listener, like I need to connect with something in the story that transports me or touches me or moves me, you know. And that's what is essential to find, to excavate in whatever we are creating, is the thing that's going to really move a listener or prompt a listener or make a listener uncomfortable or make them comfortable, or, you know, but is going to elicit some kind of reaction that cannot be denied. So I think that's what we seek, whether we're songwriters or novelists or poets, is that human kind of connection that we're going to provoke in our art.
Since we're talking about worlds, there's a great question here from Marina Velasco. She quotes Arundhati Roy. I think, Karina, this must have come out in the FT article she did, no? Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. So what does it mean for you to be between worlds? Is there that pressure of the idea that you as an artist, a writer, has a tremendous role in creating and building the next world? A great question, Karina.
Great question.
Who wants to start?
I'm gonna answer that because because Karina is my publisher, and I consider her my mother in letters. Really, I consider her my mother in letters. She really is. She has been supporting me since day one. And this is a very important question. This is a very important question because in the middle of writing what I'm writing right now, this project, and the pandemic hits, and you're really hit with the question: am I still going to write it the same way?
Yeah.
If I'm going to write write a story about, a Filipino story that's set in the modern world, in a city in the modern world, how will it resonate post-pandemic? We're not just talking about the spirit of the novel. We're also talking about audiences. We're also talking about relevance. We're also talking about critics, right? If you are a mid-career writer, not just middle-aged, like if you are a mid-career writer, then you're forced to contend with those things. Because what kind of novel what kind of story are you going to put out now that the world has known this?
Yeah.
Because this has added to our awareness of the world. We can't take it away. We can't write something without knowing it anymore. That's especially true for realist fiction. But of course, when you're creating a whole new world, this kind of colors your power to create, because this is the pandemic is almost a created situation. It's almost a created situation.
Yeah. Well, no one envisioned this world in 2020, right?
Not at all.
Yeah.
And I love that.
A lot of excuses for myself. Sorry, go ahead, please. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I love that metaphor that Arundhati Roy has put forward as a portal that we need to move through, because what that does is that helps us let go of this other metaphor of get back to normal, but that normal that we're familiar with is what got us here, right? It created this world where we're destroying nature and we're expanding in unhealthy ways, and provoking these kinds of pandemics. It's created these societies that are so unequal that we cannot even care for those who are most vulnerable during a crisis like this. It's created this space where we can't feed ourselves or our neighbors because we don't have access to local farms or the shoreline, right? So the idea of a portal is such that we need to move through it. And part of moving through it is letting go of what has not been useful or has been detrimental so far. And another metaphor that I'll put forward is, in preparing for this, I was going back through my book and looking at poems which I hadn't read in a while, and I was like, okay, what one would be relevant for it? And I have a poem about a period of time in Batanes in 1791 when the community here under Spanish occupation led a revolt. And after the Spanish put it down, they found the leader and they executed him. And then they exiled the people of Sabtang, of our island here, for 50 years. They would not permit people to return for longer than just a day or so. And we lost many people through that. Many families did not return. And this poem is called Exile. And it talks about that period of time and what that meant for us as a people and how we survived it, and how after that period of time we returned and we built our villages again, and we came back to the shoreline and we rebuilt our families. And I think in one sense, we are all in a kind of exile ourselves right now. We're in exile from that we were living before. Sometimes we're in physical exile of our loved ones and our families, our communities. And what happens next? You know, what do we need to relinquish, surrender, and let go in order to move forward in a way that allows us to care for each other, to care for the earth that sustains us? You know, that's what I'm most interested in now, and that's the kind of art that I'm most interested in working with.
But so away from that, and someone was asking Christian Chua, what kind of literature may elevate the down feelings brought about by the pandemic? What do we need in order to express positive attitudes? Just maybe poetry. Would poetry probably help at this time? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, poetry can be incredibly uplifting, I think, right? And I put the whole range of poetry in there. I mean, with my daughter, we read Dr. Seuss a lot now, right? And some of his books are pure poetry. They're beautiful. They sound beautiful. The story is beautiful, and the language is amazing. And they're fun, right? They make us smile and laugh. And I think poetry can do that because it hits you. You know, it hits you in unexpected ways. And we need space now, not to just be serious all the time. I mean, we need something uplifting. We need something inspiring. And one of the books that I love to return to is a book of poetry by Nikki Giovanni called Cotton Candy on a Rainy Day. You know, and her poems are often short, a little whimsical, and they're lovely, you know, and sometimes I pull it off the shelf and read it out loud, and it lifts my spirits, you know. And there's all kinds of poetry like that, in addition to the other poems that allow us to open up to you know, the deeper emotions that we need to work through as well. So yeah, poetry I think can unlock a lot of the experiences that we can feel right now.
And talking about inspiration, though, pandemics, someone pointed out, Christian pointed out, that pandemics have been the inspiration for literature, such as Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, right? So how may we find inspiration in our challenging times today?
I think when something that I said in the beginning, I think in dark times, in times of danger, in times of pandemic, in times of war, in times of grief, in times of loss, I think the human heart really looks for what's alive, what's really human, what all the superficial noise and bustle and all of that. Suddenly the heart wants something that means something, wants to know what's magical, what's alive, what's strong. And I noticed that during the pandemic, my daughter, who's in her early 20s, and her friends, they were all reading novels. And it was so moving to see people were reading books and looking for whatever art gives us, which is intensity, which is the magical, which is the whimsical. But it's that intensity of life, which is in a way what we want. I mean, that's why we fall in love. That's why we go parachuting. It's those moments of intensely lived experience where you say, wow. And it's always linked to I think it's almost always linked to this sudden mystery where the veil drops and you say, wow, this is the world, this is life. And it's not necessarily a happy feeling. It can be, it's a feeling of awe. And you say, wow, you know, and there's something, perhaps sometimes something of the sacred in that, where you see, and I think art is very linked to touching that, locating that, and making that visible, both for the writer and for the reader. You know, we find it as we do it too.
Well, you were talking about the sacred. Now, I have Professor Miroy here with a question. Do you have a spiritual practice for your writing or for your survival strategy? Does that come into your writing in any way? Sorry.
Sarge is
There's so many
laughing.
beliefs. There's so many beliefs hooked up to that question that, you know, it's like a line of beliefs up to it. No,
I mean, writing itself might be a ritual.
I'll just answer.
Right? There's like a ritual sometimes involved in writing that could be spiritual in a way. Sorry, Dorian. Yes.
No, I was just going to answer in a practical way, and that is in terms of, we've talked about quiet, and we've talked about accessing, you know, whether it's characters you're trying to you know, uncover, or language, or a certain phrase, or a word even, or a theme. And for me, I do need to strip away some of the worldly demands, you know, in order to listen. Again, I would come back to that. So I do regularly meditate, and I found that has whatever form you take, praying and meditation for me is very important in terms of the creative process, because for me it's a way of clearing the ground, you know. It's a way of opening up to spirits, to voices that can then enter your work and be in conversation with you. And however, it could be different for different people, but I think however you can find a way to access that. It's not going to be the same for everybody. I mean, for some people, they need activity or inspiration of sounds and noise. But for me, it is, again, that quiet, the regular practice of meditation, breathing, that helps me access the rhythm and the poetic thread, again, that I seek to follow.
I think, sorry, I'm afraid to, like, I didn't mean to give such a flippant answer, but what I want to say is that for me, humanity is in itself a spiritual thing.
Yeah,
you know, when I approach my writing, I'm always concerned about the humanity in it. I'm always concerned about that. And that is what makes me write. That is the spirituality in which I write. That is the spirit that feeds me, humanity. And it's, for me, a very, that's the thing, that's the altar I worship at, you know, where I'm so scared not to pay it enough respect. I'm so scared not to depict it in the actual way it happens, in the actual way people love or people hate, or in the actual way people are motivated to do things. And that practice of trying to capture it is in fact reliving this sort of humanity, reliving it in you, finding it in you. And while we might have sort of different ways of seeing it, Dorian, I totally get you when you say, you know, you come to that quiet place, because in that quiet place, you come face to face with yourself, your own humanity. You say, yeah,
right.
this is it, you know, this is what I felt, you know, and you come to terms with it. And in that way, you come to an acceptance of it, you know. So
and I think it's very linked, though, what both of you are saying, you know, the humanity, trying to have that, and the meditation, because I also meditate, I also pray. And for me to be able to see and depict what's really human about humans, I find I need now, at this point in my life, to try to have a more, just like a more spiritual view in it, which means more quiet, more distance, and not just the little mind, the little self, which is how I work. I'm not saying that at all that that's how everyone who writes work. But if I see it just through my small little eyes, I feel I miss a lot. Whereas if I take time, I meditate, and I try to feel other aspects of looking at the world, sometimes things come out that are not coming from my little mind or my little heart or my little selfish interest, which sometimes some of my work comes from. And there I feel there's more value in the work, because that's kind of what I look for as a reader. When I read, I want to read writers who make me feel, wow, you know, there is this mystery in the universe. There is this amazing tenderness and compassion for these deeply flawed characters that makes me love them, you know, all the bad and dirty and whatever, but they're so human and they're so moving. And that's what I love when I read work. It makes the heart open, it makes the soul open. So the spiritual practice to me at this point in my life is extremely, extremely, extremely important. And that's why I judge myself sometimes so harshly in my writing. Because sometimes I say, where is the writing come from? From what level is the writing coming from? Is it from this, you know, very base level, or is it from some kind of level that has more compassion for the characters and more vision, more insight into who they are?
Okay, I need a moment to digest that as well.
Sorry.
No, that
I
was
overwrite and I overtalk, so.
no, but I mean, what you said was like, yeah, it's true though. I mean, it's the well that it comes from, right? So let's talk about collective anxiety and how. What are your thoughts about writing and anxiety, the latter of which gets magnified in the isolation of a pandemic? This is from Punky, a question from Punky, and also talking about anxiety caused by the social. Well, what are your thoughts on writing and anxiety, and the anxiety which gets magnified in the isolation of a, you know, caused by a pandemic, and then plus not to mention the social political events, actually the currents that we're faced with. Yeah.
I'm a professional at being anxious, so I can start. People pay me to be anxious about them. So seriously, the thing that's also sort of frozen a lot of writers, and I know, I've interviewed a couple of writers for an article that I'm writing, is really anger. It's anger. There's a lot of anger that's going around, and I wanted to say that it is political anger. This anger, this pandemic is very strange because it really lays bare the political bones of where you are, where you live, what station you are in life, where you're not, who you aren't, or who you wish you could be. It really has laid bare those bones, and I would like to sort of not just commiserate, but rise up in solidarity with other writers who feel the same anger. But I would also like to say that let's not just go to social media and Facebook. Let's write the thing. Let's be angry about the thing. It's so stunning, and it's so anxiety inducing that it's already a metaphor in itself. This pandemic, something that freezes the world in their political positions and amplifies the darkness and the negativity and the bad things that have potential, that are potentially happening. They are happening. And I think this is another thing that's been causing a lot of sort of dullness in a lot of people's minds, particularly writers, I think. And I just wanted to bring that up because a lot of writers have come to me saying, I can't write anything. 150 days and haven't been able to write anything. All they've been is angry or anxious or terrified or depressed. And sometimes the answer is, it depends on where you live. Such a basic answer, literally depends on where you live. Because if you live in a place where you have, you've lost your job, or there's no there's no hope for you, or where you're in a political black hole or in an almost failed state, that's it for you. What kind of voice does a writer have? What kind of job should we do? I think that's a question that is hanging in everybody. Of course, there's a lot of projects. We want to do those projects. We want to do that great, audacious project. It's great that we have 150 days, but given 150 days of silence in this kind of political climate, what are we going to do with, our writing thoughts and our voices? That's been a question of mine that I asked myself, and that I wish we had the voice, I wish we would write something like that.
Well, yeah, having that terror law, the anti-terror bill law hanging over our heads as well, and kind of, that can also affect what you write, and that feeds the anger too, right? The anger and the frustration and the anxiety.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Bonnie, you were saying.
No. I just thought it was very, very strong what Sarge was saying. And
Yeah, I would just add that I try my best to listen to what I think is called for in a certain moment. As me as an artist or as a writer, that's why I feel a lot of my work in journalism has tried to follow what I feel are stories that need to be told to try to bring light to things that need to be addressed. And I think now is a time, it's hard, given what is happening in the world, it's hard to say, oh, okay, I'm gonna do my little creative project here. We see in the world, the demands are so great to make sure our neighbors are doing okay, right? To make sure, how is my family doing? Is my family safe, right? So I think it's okay to do what's being called for. You need to set aside those things sometimes and do what's urgent. If we need to protect our voices, protect our freedom of speech, protect our ability to create, that requires sometimes more time towards organization, towards practical things that in a very basic way don't allow for time to do creative projects. That used to make me more frustrated, but now I see that I spend way more time now farming, doing fishing, working with my neighbors to make sure our homes are safe, than I do writing. That's just the reality. It's where we are right now. Those things I feel are important, right? And we need to do that. In the end, I hope that those kinds of efforts lead to a healthier community for all of us, so that we all can keep creating this art. We all can keep telling our stories. You know what I mean? But it adds another layer of anxiety, I feel, especially for artists who are trying to create, when they're concerned about their children who aren't in school, who are having to go to school, who are vulnerable, who are, we have these very important things to address, and now is the time to do it. And however you can pitch in and do it, whatever works for you, whether it is your writing or maybe it's baking, maybe it's help using your nursing skills or whatever it is, to help our community. That's what is really being called for right now. And that's, for me at least, that's what I'm putting my energy towards.
Okay,
which means less poetry right now, but I'm okay with that.
Do you want to add anything, Bonnie? Can we go a bit to craft now? We have some questions asking about more like the craft of writing. I'm assuming you all work with laptops, or do you still write, have do longhand on a legal pad or something, or a typewriter? So you're all laptops, right? Or the notebook, and then Dorian, maybe you have a notebook and you have your ideas, and then, you transpose the poetry onto a laptop. Okay, so what piece of advice can you give to neophyte writers? How do you just write also? So here's the masterclass part of it. Just get on with it, I guess. Like you.
I don't have any advice. I don't even know if writers are born or made. I don't know. It just happens. I think writing happens. I don't know if writers happen. You know, writing happens. You know.
I think you just write, right? I mean, it's something that compels you to. You're just compelled to write, I suppose. I don't know. Do you have any hacks, writing hacks or something?
Mm-hmm.
I would add also, like, don't undervalue your role as a reader or a listener or however you consume art. You know, think about that a little bit. Like, why do I read novels? Why do I read short stories? What am I looking for? What enjoyment does it give me? Where does it take me? You know, those stories when we were kids and we heard our lolas and lolos talking about, you know, this happened and that happened, and you were carried away by that. You know, it's like, tap into that. Like, why are you a reader? And I think that helps us understand why you're doing the writing. You know, writing is hard work. Writing requires isolation. Writing requires sacrifice, right? So it is good to know why you're doing it, you know? And I think that it helps understanding the enjoyment or the passion as a reader. And I think that too often is ignored or given little attention. So I think for newer writers, it's important to think about what you love about the story, what you love about poetry, what you love about books, you know, and that can help define for you, you know, why you're committing to this, because it is a commitment, right? And it can sustain that fire that will help drive you. Now that's different than craft. I mean, talking about craft is probably a different conversation, but I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
And
I think I can just address to the young writer that I was, where I just wrote and wrote and wrote because things needed to be said, but I had very little idea of craft. And what I think it's very important for writers to write, but then to also know how to shape, to know how to edit, to know how to contain. That's my own experience. And I didn't know what a story was. I was writing stories, but I mean, there are many kinds of stories, but I didn't know very much about what a story was. And I think certain books, and again, this is very personal and people have different things, but the Poetics of Aristotle really helped me in terms of just saying, okay, it can start here, it can take place in one day. Something happens, you know, I mean, I'll go back to the basics. There are many types of stories where nothing happens and are, as we know, fabulous stories. But somehow that really helped me to really start with the A, B, C, D of what the story was. You know, there are characters. You can start with the plot. You can start with the characters. I start with the characters. What happens? What's that character facing? And why is it important? And follow that through the story. And is the ending different from the end? You know, because sometimes that matters in a story, and it may not matter, but if I'm lost in a story, knowing that I'm following my characters through and something's going to happen that's going to change the whole trajectory, that just helps me shape it and contain it, and then it holds the story, so all the rest can come pouring out, or all that has been poured out can be contained into something in the end that's satisfying. So yeah, so I had to learn craft the hard way after a lot of really messy, useless stories that went.
So you've had manuscripts you've had to abandon? Manuscripts or
I have a very hard time really abandoning, you know, I like cut and paste and stuff like that. One thing that's really helped me in terms of my writing is showing the work, not to other writers. I also show them to writer friends, but to readers, to people who just want to read and who can't talk about craft or anything. People who will say, but I don't understand what the hell she's thinking about, or why did she do this, or like the ending is bad. You know, somebody will just say it just doesn't work, which is what happened with my novel. My daughter read it and said, I love the book, but the ending, you just betrayed all of us with that ending. You know, so I redid the ending because she said, Mom, you can't do that to me. You can't end it in that way. You just wanted to finish the book, and it shows, you know, which was true.
So what was your original ending before you changed it?
The original ending?
Or maybe no spoiler alert for now.
Oh, it's boring. It's boring. That's why I abandoned it. So I won't go into that.
Okay.
And can I add, with just for in case viewers are interested in poetry, I think with a poem makes you feel a certain way, emotionally, but also physically. It takes your breath, right? So you're reading it, or you're, even if silently, you're out of breath by the time you get somewhere, or you're full of energy by the time you get somewhere. So if you read a poem that you enjoyed, go back and start asking why. Why did the line break in that point? Why didn't it just keep going? Why did the poet stop there and go to a new line? Why did this word come after this word? Why is there punctuation there, and why is there not punctuation? To start asking those questions, and then you start getting to the scaffolding of the poem, you know, how it was put together. And once you start kind of demystifying parts of that, that adds to your skill set and allows you to question yourself as you're writing your poetry. Why am I making the line break here? Why am I choosing this word over that word? Why am I taking this action, making this choice at this point? You need to understand those reasons. You need to have a reason why you're making certain choices. And in order to understand that, reading someone else's poem that you admire or that touched you is a good place to start. And and that will allow you to take a closer look at your own choices in your own writing that we all need to constantly do.
How do you know when it ends? Unless you're writing, let's say, a more formal form of poetry, like a sonnet, which has 14 lines and a certain rhyme scheme, right? The whatever pentameter and all that. You actually know when to end it. And so if you're writing one, you know, it all goes into that, right? Because the last couplet or whatever has to encompass, you know, it has to conclude the entire sonnet. But you tend to write free verse. So when do you know when it ends?
It's so different. It's so different depending on what the poem is conveying. There are some poems that have a strength on their imagery. So you end on a memorable or breathtaking image. There's other poems that are trying to sustain an idea. So you need to conclude that idea. There's other poems that are asking a question, right? So I think you need to understand what the poem is doing. What is the poem doing? And all these things I'm saying come in the revision phase, not so much in the creation phase. I think in the creation phase, you should not ask these questions. In the creation phase, your job is to facilitate, tend that fire of inspiration and keep it going. It will exhaust itself. After it exhausts itself, put it away, give it some time, and come back to it. When you come back to it, you need to ask these hard questions. And knowing when a poem ends comes through asking these questions, right? Am I concluding the story I wanted to conclude? Am I asking the question fully I need to ask? Am I leaving the listener with the image that I want to stick with them? But you need to understand what the poem is doing in order to answer that question of when it concludes, right?
So how do you separate yourself from your writing? Because when writing, you tend to project yourself onto one of your characters, so you become emotionally attached to them. How do you prevent that from happening? This is a question from the audience. Sarge?
I think there has to be this distance is sort of built into the critical mind of the writer. You know, you need to. I was gonna answer. For example, when you read a book and you're a writer, I think what motivates you to write is you want to write the book you want to read. You know, if you're a filmmaker, you want to make the film that you want to see. So in this case, you know, achieving this sort of distance is for me a sort of you put on the hat of the reader. You become artistically cold to the work that way. You put on the hat of a critic. In other words, somebody who views your work or somebody who looks at the work and appraises it, on its own, of course, on its own terms, and there's no real way. This is why consulting, editing, workshopping sometimes come handy. This is where somebody can tell you that, you're too much into your work. That said, there's still some value in putting a lot of yourself into that work. So there's a lot of sort of self-confidence and self-editing and doubt that sort of go into tension with each other, just like the tension between distance and closeness. And it's a whole process. You learn that as you develop, as you keep writing. You learn this. This is why everybody starts out as a poet. Everybody writes, their long, love sonnets to somebody who's probably dead by now, or who they've forgotten, This is why everybody starts that way, as an expressive sort of, as an expressive being. And then you realize that you're making something, you're making art, you're making a thing, I think it's part of the process. This coldness is part of the process. I don't know how to speed that up because it takes years, Took Robert Frost 20 years to write his first book, It's a process, and the only way to speed up is probably read more, understand what makes a good poem or a good story or a good novel, understand what people think to be a good piece of art. Also, there's a lot of tension in that kind of space as well. Then you're able to create your own voice. Sometimes that voice is more distant. Sometimes that voice has more closeness to the real you.
Do you tend to have the same critical readers for your work? Like if you're working a manuscript or something, is it always the same, 1, 2, 3, 5 people that you turn to read the first draft or something? Or it's different people depending on the work? Bonnie, you were saying like you show it to other readers, right?
I show it to people who like to read, but then I also tend to hold on to my work and not show it for a long time, because if I show it and I can get thrown off course, I can lose confidence in the work. That's a big thing. I can lose confidence, or I can try to please, and I need to find really what I'm saying. I write kind of the way like Dorian described, just write. And then after, in the revision process, I ask a lot of questions, and I don't want to show it at that moment, because I feel very fragile. I'm still fragile in the work. I'm still finding out what it is. It's when I'm more sure, then I'm willing to show it to people. And I show it to writers. I ask them to really be brutal, because I don't want, I want to hear what doesn't work. But writers look at things differently than people who just read because they want the story. They just want the story. They're not counting me. Now, when I read a book, I'm saying, oh, the writer's doing this. And, there's the analytical part. Unfortunately, I don't read it the way I read when I was 11 years old. And it's just a story. And it's wonderful to give a manuscript to a person who just wants a story and who will tell you, it's getting boring, these passages are getting boring, or this is not working out, or, it's a very different kind of criticism that I find extremely valuable. So it's a mix, yeah. And mostly to people who I know will be brutal, nicely brutal.
Sarge is gonna be nice, right? You're just gonna say, oh, this didn't work.
Constructively brutal.
Constructively, that's the word.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have to wrap up now. It's almost 7. It was a great discussion, guys. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I hope everybody learned something and enjoyed the dialogue we had here today. Maybe demystified the art and craft of writing a little bit. So, when you face your laptops later this evening, you might be able to produce something. So maybe any last words before we wrap up? This talk is actually going to be on YouTube in a couple of days, in a day or so. It'll be up on YouTube on the Manila House channel. So you're welcome to, if you want to, go back to what was discussed and all that, please feel free to go to YouTube under the Manila House channel. Yeah.
I would just say, for people who are seeking to write, I would just say, find what sustains you. Find what supports your craft. It could be family members, it could be friends, it could be a certain lifestyle, it could be certain choices, it could be a job, a certain job, whatever. Find what sustains the work you want to do, and pursue that, right? And that's key, I think, to creating that space where then you can be creative, then you can take chances, you can take risks, but find what is going to support you in that journey, which is a lifelong journey of creativity.
Should I add to that, Sarge and Moni? Oops,
We can't
your
hear
mic.
you. We can't hear you, Sarge.
No, I'm just thankful that writers are given this space to talk. This space in this age of social media where we don't know what we are anymore.
Yeah.
It's great to have. It's great to meet fellow writers. Fellow writers in the audience as well. Commiserating. In this very dark time. In this very dark time, it's a very simple thing. To talk about these things, but it means a lot. Thank you.
Moni?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to all of you and to the audience. It's really been moving and nourishing to just exchange like this. I wish we could do it more often.
Again.
Thank you to all 20,000 of you. Thank you to all 20,000.
No, we've had a really good crowd today. I recognize a lot of writers, poets. It's been an honor to host all of you today and to have all of you listening in. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bambina. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Marami pong salamat. Just mamahas.
Is that in Ivatan?
Yeah,
Dorian?
just mamahas to Gino Atavo.
Okay, now Bonnie, you have to say something in French.
With my bad accent. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. And Sarge, go on. You're from Davao
Shall
originally,
I use Tagalog?
Why not? We're all Filipino writers.
Shall I use my own marginalized language? No, no. I'm just really thankful. So, salamat na marami. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. On behalf of Manila House, we thank you for joining us today. We thank our 3 stellar writers for being here with us and sharing so much of how they work and the passion that's in them and what keeps them going through these very confusing and dark times. So thank you, and I hope you all learned something today or you got some inspiration. Thank you to Ateneo de Manila University Press, Karina Bolasco, for helping to make this happen. And see you next time. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.